Thanks for tuning in. You are experiencing a multi-platform broadcast of Nuestra Palabra, Latino writers having their say on the air. We're coming at you on social media, but of course, we always go home so you can listen to us on 90.1 FM KPFT Houston's community station. You can also watch us on www.fox26houston.com. Today, we're celebrating releases of two collections of poetry. Two down vatos join us today. We're going to bring them up in person in 1 second. I want you to stare at the wonderful graphics that Roxana Guzman, our producer, created for us. And if you're listening, te va a dar envidia. But in this other sense realm, Roberto Tejada and Rodrigo Toscano will be joining us. About to bring them up on there. Hey, I'm Tony Diaz, el Libro Traficante. Happy to join you tonight. Thanks so much for tuning in. However you're catching this, maybe it's live, maybe it's in a history class, maybe it's an underground library that the Libro Traficantes have created for you. Now more than ever, we need to band together to get some of our work out there, and that's what we're all about. Want to bring in our dear friends who, of course, are celebrating their new works. We have with us Roberto. ¿Cómo estás, Roberto?
Muy bien, Tony, muchas gracias. Hola, Rodrigo.
Hola, hola.
Our new friend, Rodrigo. Bienvenido, Rodrigo.
Gracias. Buenas estar aquí. ¿Cómo están ustedes?
Muy bien, gracias.
Qué bien.
Hey, we're celebrating both of your new books, so we're having you both read from them in a little bit. Of course, Roberto is here from Houston, so you're at a short walk away over at the University of Houston, and we've got to hang out. Well, we've been doing work for the BIPOC Arts Network Fund. So saludos, mi amigo. Great to see you. Felicitaciones en tu nueva obra que está saliendo.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Great to work with you on that panel on the BIPOC.
Fantastic. And today you're co-hosting. And Rodrigo, oye, you're desde New Orleans y otras partes. Tell us exactly where you're at right now, and tell us a little bit about your trajectory.
I've been here in New Orleans for almost 6.5 years now. And before that, I was in New York City for 16 years. Before that, I was in San Francisco for about 4 or 5 years. And I'm originally from San Diego, California.
619.
Uh-huh. Oh, 619. Oh, you remember, Roberto, because that's right. You lived there too for a while.
De cada lado.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. And so I have family on both sides of the border. And my mother's family is from Ensenada. And my father is sort of was one of those Chicanos in California forever and a day.
That's awesome. Well, this Chicano from Texas is happy to saludarte, felicitarte. And we're going to start off by treating you both as poets because you both do a lot of work in the community, which is fantastic. But as I know happens, people sometimes forget that we are poets and writers. I'm going to say first, if we have to put things in order. So, Rodrigo, I want to celebrate your new book. So do us a favor. We're gonna go off screen, and we want people to know the name of your book, the title of the poem you're reading for us, and then once you read it for us, we're gonna come back, get our take on it, get Roberto's take on it, pero más que nada, disfrutar de tu obra. Are you ready?
Okay. Yeah. Yes. So this new book of mine is called The Charm and the Dread. It's a book of poetry. It's published by Fence Books, and it was published just in January of 2022. And so I'm going to be reading a poem from this called Brown Lives. Brown lives, the phrase, as is, don't matter. In Mexico, the shades are endless. Where draw the line? You'd go quite mad. What matters in Mexico is lana, cold cash. How much? How far? The flow. What things, what folks you gather around you. Of course, colorism thrives in Mexico, weighs in, tips scales. But saying and insisting, brown lives, the phrase, as is sacred, is blurry talk. Happy talk won't supply the flow, the things, the folks you gather around you. The line, when drawn, would shift yearly, monthly. The haggle would matter to oligarchs a lot. The haggle would matter to academia even more. Brown lives, whole departments might thrive, service lines, blurring oligarchs, long game. Still, though, colorism thrives. In Mexico, it hurts, it works for some, for sure. Same families have winners and losers. It's important to confront colorism, frankly, but lana, go see, take in, don't flinch, draws lines on top, down below, both sides, makes box. In Mexico, boxes matter, not lines that shift weekly, daily. You'd go quite mad demarking where, jumping back, jumping over, vying to drag stuff here to there and back, stuck in a box in Mexico, decaled with brown lives matter merch donated by happy oligarchs of oil, of telecom, of finance, beachfront empires, foreground to hillside slums, background to nervous middlings, frozen between, undecided about lines, boxes, which matter and why, earning zeal, spending zeal to audit Mexico lindo is necessary. The peso plunging today, 10%.
Así, mano. Good stuff. Hablando de la lana. Hey, hold up the poem so we could see how it looks on the page.
Yeah.
Por
It's,
favor.
the bandwidth is, I read it usually slower than I do. It's the bandwidth is, you can see, is quite rapid.
Nice.
And yeah, so.
And it's got that cadence.
Yeah, I didn't read it the turbo because I wanted to have the words be understood more than
And is
anything.
it the bandwidth of, generally of the book?
No, well, there's a lot of poems like that, Roberto. There's maybe like 30% are in that bandwidth, and then there's actually a lot of sonnets in the
I've
book.
heard you read from the sonnets. That's what I was curious about.
Yeah.
The percussive elements of Brown Lives, for example, and I know some of the sort of Baroque sonnets that also form part of this collection.
Yeah, and there's one or other two modalities, but those are the two main ones in this book, The Charm and the Dread. The sort of Baroque, formal, very rhetoric heavy kinds of sonnets, and then kind of letting go of the signs, all this sort of sparkly way of referencing things that the poem Brown Lives does. Just kind of like riffing, you might say.
I'm not sure what else you're going to read this evening, but maybe you might want to say something about the ways in which you sort of layer. The reason I use the word Baroque is it seems to me that your work is built on these sort of impastoed, painterly layers of language from technology, popular culture, mass media, rascuachismo.
Well, it's funny. I play Baroque music on piano and the harpsichord both. And
I didn't know that. Dang.
So it's not an exaggeration that I literally know Baroque aesthetics and procedures and more than that, like sensibility and tolerance toward those layered figurations, and of course a mania for variation, right? So very much my work I think reflects sort of my musical tastes. Thelonious Monk is another composer that I really admire, that also has layerings and figurations, is very kin to that sort of Baroque kind of high rascuachismo,
And I think also one of the other elements of the Baroque is the appeal of paradox. So even the title of the book, The Charm and the Dread, is working on these two energies that are kind of the motors for language and kind of the pathway and the desire of the poems themselves.
Oh yeah, definitely. There was a lot of sort of logical binaristic thinking and combinations. You know, four could be, you know, 1 and 4 or 2 and 2, or, you know, 4 distinct units. That kind of sort of fraction thinking is very common in Baroque music, and I would say poetry too.
You know what's really cool along those same lines? I love that, you know, you got three Chicanos talking about aesthetics at this level, but kind of like Roberto just said, you got Rascachismo in there. Like, I'm hoping that when people hear this on 90.1 FM KPFT, because that's what I love about the station, is that you have got all these different ways to experience art, culture, etc. There's still a lot of raza that listens to FM radio. So someone's going to be tuning and they're going to hear the word lana in your poem.
Yeah.
Ya les va a picar. They're like, lana, wait, what? ¿Qué pasó ahí? You know?
I know. And there's in Mexico, there's a way that they do with the hand, the gesture, right? Like you know, do you remember that? Like, it's just you sort of, for your listeners, you make a, what would that be, like the letter C with your thumb and your index finger, and you sort of twist it to the right, drop it down a little bit, but do it so quick as to that it's barely noticed, and it's just maybe it's the intent to do it that signals that we're talking about lana.
Right.
That's great.
How about that for Baroque?
Dang.
The description, perfect. I mean, the poem is bold as well, because I mean, I think that you're talking about an aspect of Latinx culture that many individuals, families, cultures don't want to address, which is colorism. And
Yes.
it's done in a way in which you're opening up the imagination and maybe psychosis around it, but not necessarily taking a particular position,
That's
but clearly, right? But clearly, this is something that's brought to the attention of the reader, right?
Yeah, no, it's an irritant. You know, it's a deterministic irritant. Another way, let me translate that. It's it gets under the skin, if that's a little better. Colorism, but also, you know, I wanted to sort of preempt, you know, Chicanos from going around and you know, before they start, you know, screaming brown lives, y esto que el otro. I wanted them to think really, really hard through you know, historical layers of class and concentrations of power and wealth, and what that really means, and how does that mix with the colorism, right? I don't want just the colorism and just talking about that. I'm not interested in you know, a few, you know, Latinx people, you know, making it to the top. That's not, you know, this glass ceiling thing. I'm interested in uplift, you know, for working people broadly. And so that's a different kind of thinking. And so the poem is a little bit of an irritant. It's meant to be provocative somewhat, but I try to argue it through, I think.
Between the happy talk and the blur.
Yes.
And I'm going to resist leaning in, because this is just one poem so far, ladies and gentlemen. So, of course, hey, students, if you're tuning in, you can go back, create a transcript, send it to us, but you can turn that in for a great paper in your literary analysis course, because that's awesome stuff. And there's even more to talk about. But you know what? I want to celebrate Más Poesía.
Okay.
Again, this is about all the depths, all the levels. So, Rodrigo, hit us with another one, and then we got to get to también Roberto breaking down one as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me see. I think I'm going to read this one called Mannerbunde. It's a German word, Mannerbunde, and it means men's association or men's club. And this is significant thing during the you know, before the Nazis in the Weimar period. There was all these clubs that pre-existed, and so taking over those formations one by one was very key for the Nazis to form a front of fascism. That's the way they did it. They did it through very particular invasions of pre-existing structures. And so that's what a Mannerbunda is. So this poem's called Mannerbunda. Guns, shedfuls of them, you'll see, will not be the deciding factor in the big shift towards hemispheric autarky. No amount of rounds and clips hoarded in safes will rewrite labor laws that integrate Canadian, American, and Mexican biopower around a vision of itself, protective economically, expansive culturally. Interposed maps of watersheds, routes of produce, conduits of clean energy lasered in on healthy work and stable housing. The big shift doesn't require belly-crawling sharpshooters, grown boy, camps, Mannerbunda, sing-alongs, pining after dreams of becoming sovereign, when all's entangled already, except not formally and equitably, set to a higher order, resource-conscious, confident future, commandeering hemispheres, collective wealth, material and psychic, brave projection, bulwark against this anarcho-tyranny, faux nationalism, yacht excursion for winners and rigged outcomes, swamp monsters, becoming great again, promoting shedfuls of ammo, camo, grown-up boy, lingerie, boudoir, Mannerbunda, posing on towering trucks, performing sovereign, when all's entangled already, but on a wobbly base, with side shows, gun shows, crouching, cowering, last gasps of sovereign kings, every man a serf, owning nothing, not mineral deposits, not beds of technology, not downstream planning, education, cargo, material and psychic, oblivious to rising forces, integrated, autarkic, prosperous, homelands to thrive in, where crotch-grasping, gun-toting, enfeebled copes flicker out year by year, as hemispheric power looks outward with straight backs towards other autarkic regions, working on integration of a higher order, looking outwards mindfully, negotiating globe's collective wealth, material and psychic, and yeah, a few museums of nation states and even kinky cosplay might be entertaining on occasion to remind us of the age of anarcho-tyranny and its camo lingerie, butlers on a leash, Mannerbunda.
Dang, that's potent of the moment. And forgive my camera. The battery has died, but my voice lingers. Rodrigo, I know you wrote that before. I mean, because you had to write it in time to get it published, etc. But it is of the moment, no, Roberto?
Completely. I mean, I just thinking about, for those who are encountering Rodrigo's work for the first time, I mean, every time I hear a different iteration of your work, Rodrigo, I always think that it sort of displays the anxiety and fear when we're sort of assaulted by all these voices about gun shows and side shows, and you sort of inhabit these different voices of the moment, as you say, right?
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
how does that make us feel, right?
Yeah.
In this cascading assault that the newspapers and the news and social media are constantly feeding us.
There's I mean, look, I mean, everybody filters things to some extent, but I think that I think you're talking about a sort of demonology, right? It's like I tip into it and let some of that sort of very in the moment kind of thing, very zeitgeist, take me for around the block maybe once, but twice, I know I'm going around the block, and 3 times I'm going to send that somewhere else. So so there's these becoming conscious as you're writing, and those poems, the Mannerbunda and the one that I read before, the Brown License, are so thin. You don't know really what's going to come next, but it's a very, very quick little, you might say, new form of consciousness, and you pivot off that. And if you're on your game that particular day with your writing, you'll come up with a pretty good frame as to how to move through these spaces.
I think that the idea of filtering and unfiltering is a good way of thinking about it. To the degree to which you use the word going around the block, which is kind of the idea that the maniacal nature of it is that there's these repetitions, which talks about a certain kind of
Yeah.
sense of personhood that being surrounded by these forces activates, right?
Yeah, it's a little bit of like the movie Groundhog Day, right? Also.
Nice. Yeah. That's
Well, what
great.
I love too is this is a great argument on why poetry matters, because folks are being inundated with corporate language, corporate thoughts, and this type of art just breaks that, shares that. So that's really exciting. Ladies and gentlemen, hey, you're experiencing Nuestra Palabra, Latino writers having their say. We're coming at you at 100,000 watts and 90.1 FM KPFT, of course, through social media as well, and of course on www.fox26houston.com. We are celebrating Rodrigo Toscano. He's got a new book out, The Charm and the Dread. He's reading some poems from that. And we also have our dear friend Roberto from just down the block. Get to see him all the time. We haven't had a chance to hang out in person since this lockdown. But Roberto, you've got a new book coming out as well, right?
I do. I have a book that whose publication date is in 2 weeks, on March 15th.
Well, do us a favor then. Yes, tell us the name and read a piece from it for us.
All right, excellent. It's called Why the Assembly Disbanded, and it's published by Fordham University Press. And that title, as I was recently thinking about it, for those of you who know a little bit about English and American punk from the 1970s and 80s, it's a kind of spoof on Mark E. Smith of The Fall, of the group The Fall, who has an amazing song called How I Wrote Elastic Man. And in a sense, I wanted Why the Assembly Disbanded to talk about, again, sort of very aligned with Rodrigo's work, the sense of an emptying out of the current political moment. And I'll read a poem that also is informed by the Baroque, in a sense. And it was the last poem I wrote for this volume, that is simply entitled American Household. Here I'm untethered, or else this American household is a shame for guest and resident alike, torn asunder, immovable, unmoving, horizon line before it closes on the embankment, which is too a slowing thunder. Whether cash and cake were meant for us, the undeserving, is a frenzy of thought, an amusement from the spoils of corporation, able to outweigh the will unnerving all restraint from the madness or immodesty that coils each milligram back into the sky blue oxy addiction, McKesson Cardinal Health and Amerisource Bergen, manufactured for the painless end-to-end encryption's other plum, for which we are to wait again our turn in line, and still the others keep cutting ahead of us. Here the complected and other-tongued asylum-seeking assembly of the glad in ordinary deliverance from fear. First tool in the plot that turns us into tyrants unspeaking, yet another dream to make them do what in wakeful hour is lawless, for us depraved and still deprived of power.
Potente.
Wow, you know, it sounds great. We, you know, what the prelude, the beginning of your poem is sort of procedurally similar to mine in a way, I found, except that one difference is that you create rooms, you know,
Right.
with your statements, and you know, and things fit in those sort of rooms of meaning, and you add things to that room, couple sentences, couple lines, whatever, and then you do a scene shift, you know, and then you establish another kind of thing. It's very you might, I would even say like filmic to in some ways, your way of doing it. It's not it's not, as the Latins used to say, just all furor loquendi, you know. It's a fury for, you know, for images and something else. But I love the poem. That's my way of saying I love the poems.
Well, thanks. No, scene changes are very important to me. I mean, in a sense, the theater was really my first passion, and I do think of poems as just moods, that temperatures that then begin to shift. And I did know the one thing going into the poem that I did know is I had just read an article about the opioid crisis, and the three companies that I mentioned are those that were among the most heinous offenders.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and it's interesting that you begin the piece by, for at least the way that I heard it, by declaring um, uh, either a spectator to your poem, or a possible speaker, and that one you called the untethered.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, shoot, once you're untethered,
It's
you
all
know,
over.
yeah. I mean, you're going to be moving whether you like it or not. It's like, so yeah, you might as well do it with grace. Uh, Fantastic. What's the title of that poem again?
American Household.
Oh yeah, well, so there you go. That even kind of nails it down, right? Like American household. You're aquí vamos a estar. It's like for a while.
In a little bit, I would like to get to maybe some of the identity issues you both touch on
Yeah.
in a little bit. And then the other question, too, that I want to maybe get to, because the more I talk, I'm like, okay, that could be a whole hour show. This next one, the other thing is, what I love, too, is what people are experiencing before their very ears and eyes is the evolution of Latinx poetry, Latino writing, because lo que están haciendo ambos es totalmente, con todo corazón, an intellect Latino, but at the same time, very unique of our moment as well. We'll get to that. That may be a whole 1 hour show as well. However, before we get to another poem, quick, I'd like to touch on, tell me about the metaphor of assembly.
I mean, it's one that appears in just about every aspect of our life, but the one that I think that we associate it with the most is precisely public assembly. The idea that we have the right to assemble as citizens. The cover of the book is a 1909 photograph from the New York Public Library. That's an empty space. So rooms are again relevant, but the idea that we may have once been united in some kind of mission or goal or end result, and that perhaps is not a possibility. Although I promised to answer the question in the very title, but of course I refused, or I refute the possibility of answering why the assembly disbanded, if in fact it did, right?
If it's a metaphor for, sort of a way of sort of calling out the nation state, but without having to sort of inscribe it there, right? Since what you're talking about, this other stuff is kind of ballooning in and out of that space. This is also Roberto, a theatrical problematic that you figured out. It is like a theatrical problem, like you would have on stage. It's very precise. When is that going to happen?
It even goes back to like even high school assemblies, right?
Right.
When did it like they finally disassemble at some point, or they disband, right? And of course, it's all just about
interesting though. Like, why do people? Yeah. So okay, we can talk about why people together, como una huelga, a strike, and okay, we understand, and we always look at the sort of upswing of assemblies, but we never pay close attention to disassembly as being significant and telling of what the assembly even was.
Part of it was actually because I know so many collective art groups that have worked together.
Yeah.
From ASCO, the Chicano conceptual art group from the 1970s, 1980s, inevitably, when you work together with other people, as utopic as it might be, it comes to an end, right?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, it's a good concept.
Thanks.
Love it. I'll tell you what, let's do another poem, Roberto, and then we will convene to talk about a little bit more about the rest of your trajectories to this point. And we're having a great night here with three down vatos just talking a little poetry, and celebrating Roberto's upcoming new book. He's going to read from it right now. Gracias, man.
Excellent. So this is the poem that gives title to the book, which is just a little bit longer than the book's title. or why the Assembly disbanded as before. Hosanna in the borderline cinder block warehouse, as much applause as possible, to collapse inside an ambulance now that conveys the intravenous bags and bottle holders, 27 stones from here to the Idlewild, to the gun fields. It's a place you find automaton nurses who labor in green-gray subterfuge in all-over stripes, a round of punches to the lower jaw for my part in the main. So I get it now. I'm the chosen one for reassignment, face so altered as to beguile. This is enemy convenient, a purview suitable to very new cosmetic methods. Question is, the admin diazepam and other hypodermics, were they counteractive or now consistent with enough cases as to compel canvassers to anticipate first signs of panic, sleepwalker antecedents, tray tables in upright position, crushed ice out of open mouth, air-conditioned ward, redolent of superstores and tattoo shops, or was it morphine sulfate in protocols applied to disable the congenital twins? Here's the world news. To junk science prizes, wax candy lips intone a flawless, if always accented sentence, the kind of talking from another world where my mother was Marlo Thomas and there were rival techniques contributed to the celebrity of my seven-sided disappearance? Or was that all my enuresis when I doubled in size as from her pocketbook, adorable but already diminishing?
Man,
Wow.
of the
That's a
moment.
trip. That's
So
amazing.
I just sort of explained that enuresis is bedwetting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for those who don't know, Marlo Thomas was an actress made famous in several 1970s and 80s sitcoms.
It's heavy
Yeah.
duty. She may be forgotten. Speaking of disassembling,
Yeah.
What happens when megastars are? This
Sort
is
of,
Oh yeah, when
eclipse.
they explode, yeah, like when superstars, you drop down the list, so to speak,
Mhm. I,
Um,
I want to talk about both of your community work as well, but also you both mentioned music. So on the FM broadcast of this show, we're going to drop music in there. I've heard mentions of Thelonious Monk. We've heard punk rock mentions. Let's drop a few more songs that influence you. Roberto, drop a few other influential songs that thrill you. Maybe I don't want to put too much pressure on Rodrigo Bravo, our producer, to find them and to put them in here.
I'll actually make it easy for you. I've created a Spotify playlist to my book of poems.
No te creo, de verdad. That's
Te lo
cool.
juro, te lo juro. And part of it is, I mean,
Yeah.
the book has a kind of science fiction or speculative nature as well. That sometimes it takes place in these cosmos or in these worlds that are like our world, but maybe tangential to it. So I've included a lot of Latinx or Latin American psychedelia, including some very interesting psychedelic bands from Brazil. There's a band called Bugarins that's really marvelous, and they're an offshoot called Guache. Some Tijuana Nortec. It's just, these are kind of the rhythms that are kind of that point to other worlds within our own worlds. So that's kind of a couple of tunes that I can mention. How about you, Rodrigo?
Wow, that was quite a trip. I just want to ask you a quick question about the psychedelic. Is that neo psychedelic or psychedelic from back in the late 60s?
Mostly neo psychedelic, but in the case of Brazilian music, so much of it always points back to the 1960s and 70s and what's called música popular brasileira, which is it was a fusion of samba and basically the Beatles, early electronic rock, and it has that the kind of sonic space of altered states, warped sounds, but also very much informed by pop music and with a very much
Yeah,
pop aesthetic.
interesting. Yeah, yeah. Well, I range, I would say very widely. I mean, I have a deep interest in not just Baroque keyboard music, but specific decades in the Baroque, like say between 1620 and 1640. That period, I really listen to a lot. So, like a composer there that I'm really fascinated by is Johann Froberg. Um, and his harpsichord music really compels me. And then I can jump all the way to more modern. I was as a teen. I think Roberto and I had a very similar, and we've talked about this. I think we were both very much attracted to punk and what would be the different varieties of post punk in Southern California. And so and then for me, I jumped right more into sort of one of those varieties of post punk was mod, or rather neo mod music, and of course like bands like The Jam or somebody that I really liked, and then I was also very much into the two-tone movement, the ska movement. So therefore, I would go all the way back to the original ska, not of that period of the 80s, but like Toots and the Maytals from Jamaica, and so I would really rock out on that stuff, original ska, and also I like I like all sorts of music. I like jazz a lot. Um, I like some of the 19th century piano music, early 19th century, Schubert, Schumann, people like that. And then I can go just really going back to my roots for the late 70s, early 80s, and there's a ton of bands that I could name for you that I was into. Um, as a kid, I did like norteño music for sure.
Mm.
You know, this is when Los Tigres where they were I mean really not known. They weren't this superstar kind of stuff. I remember there were a lot of groups that were at their level in the 70s. Roberto Ayala, and actually some of those guys in the bands, they actually switched from band to band. So it's a lot like rock music, who's the accordionist, and there's a lot of switching. But when they finally settled down and did their first norteño music, I forget the name of the album was, but I actually had it.
Oh
And
wow.
yeah, I know it's like the very, very first one. I don't know how I got a hold of it, but yeah. So I'm interested in all sorts of kinds of music.
I'm gonna give you both homework then. So that's a great list of tunes. If you can both email me
Uh-huh.
either an MP3 or a link to any of those tunes, two each, and I'll make sure Rodrigo gets those so they can accompany the readings during the FM broadcast. And you know what? I've raised a ton of questions. We only have about 11 more minutes. So you know what I'd love? Let's just do a speed round of poems. And how about this? Let me add this. What might be fun, because I know you've marked some pages, but let's also add a little adrenaline rush. We get each will read a poem that responds to the other, because you almost kind of did there, you know?
Okay.
So,
Okay. All
so
right.
how about this? We're gonna have Rodrigo go, and then he'll read his poem, and then we'll bring in Roberto back in with his response, and hopefully we can. Let's go for a back and forth of 4 poems. I'm not even sure what this is called yet, but this is an
Okay. No.
interesting
Está
series.
bien. Suena bien. Suena bien. Okay. This is a little shorter than the other ones because to keep the rhythm going. This one's called Betimes, a Rhapsody for Activists. Betimes you stall, and by stalling, rocket. Betimes you're a dead bored worker. Betimes a devoted worker without deep purpose. Betimes you're a thrill-seeking slacker. Betimes a genius co-worker without peers. You chose this. You chose dialectical wreck sensational. You pounced toward direct intents unknown. You've sloughed off crooked nationalism. You've blown up indolence, on some occasions, eloquence. Who can Velcro on a plasticized red wig when you want it? Who can supply you a bronze lion future beast of victory? Betimes you're a pre-pounce poet, posing as pouncer. Betimes you're a post-pounce as twitchy twitch. Not whatever, never whatever, but this. You're a spectral socialist, savage. You're a spectral socialist, civilizing. You're a spectral socialist, dirt clod on diamond. Who can futurize the people without the trademark? Who enacts fire canister hierarchical reform? Betimes you carouse and by carousing arouse. Betimes you're a hella, as y'all say, cat with hiss and claws. Betimes you're a devotee to love slamming you to the ground. Did you really choose this gem? Art thou chosen? Are you ascending now towards free-floating domes in the sky? Have you handily sloughed off sultry stance nationalism? Betimes nationalism offers services, left or right. Betimes intranationalism show a way out for a fee. Who can hyperspatialize the people without coordinates? Who enacts supersymmetrical justice reform? You're a spectral socialist, bit actor. You're a spectral socialist, stunt double. You're a spectral socialist, diamond fleck on demon dung. Betimes, you rocket, and by rocketing, stall. Betimes, you stall, and by stalling, rocket.
So cool. I'm going to resist talking, ladies and gentlemen. This is our intellectual volleying of poetry. Roberto, take it away and tie it in, brother.
You'll see why I chose this one by the time I get to the last line. Beyond reckoning. Admission here of my behavior to dissemble a story about the victors, my quarter moon and crossbar, my fact sheet glossy chevron. I'm enabled in place, as I never meant for Hamburg or Brussels, never Athens, no matter how I obliterate my evolving thoughts concentric with the fragrances of clean and nearness to atrocity, a measurement of days, and progress in terms of I too obtain in amazement, sometimes far, sometimes so in the urban sequence, inalienable begotten ever of the million chemical components, the color asphalt, tawny, chlorophyll, grizzle. I confess, I suspect, I unfriend a shy electorate with something notable like evidence or argument, something noble for the influx of learning my lesson in connection to belief in what teacher tells me, with no mind to erasing my purpose. Why forfeit the cruelty of forms? I accept, I concede, I allow, I discomfort. And are we now adjourned? Oh, hear ye therefore ghost and guest in graphite, timely, untimely.
So enough time to tirarte flores. Julie Pujol Corose, beautiful poem. Great. I don't know how they're doing it. They are firing volleys of poetry.
Okay. Write the city. What's the point of New York City? Or for that matter, Calgary, or any city on a hill, or hidden far beneath the waves, any city at any time, any city planned or dreamt of. What's the point of males and females? What's the rub with transportation, movement of foodstuffs or the arts, distribution of new pleasures, or the same old ones year by year, making for a steady story? What's the point of stock characters, emotions bundled or spread out, arguments over arguments, escapes from argumentation, fantastical propositions, promises to extend a hand? What's the point of scheduling things all in tandem or at random through avenues, streets, and alleys, secrets secreted forever, or spilled onto morning pavement, draining into holes seaward bound?
Very cool, man. I'm going to resist talking because now we want more rounds of poems and firing the next poem. Roberto Tejada.
Delayed or modified. Faculty of the animal inclined to action, ever suspect or delayed, and then we modify the rule of law. Criminals encoding glossy accidents in the ether, all the granulated dashes, lunge and promise elongation, someone to justice attack and retreat, someone awed by the acuity of mood, attunement breeze in proximity to a world where hope and worry tussle with such twin attentions as time or trust for what in punitive terms was my entanglement. I have now the method for loss in the republic, immeasurable world, it is all involving.
And to close out this round, Rodrigo is going to put a nice bow on it. Listo,
Okay.
mano?
All right, we're gonna go maybe a couple centimeters above the biosphere, and then maybe we'll drop down and maybe we'll go up again a little bit above it. Let's see. This poem's called Clouds in Us. Can't believe clouds are on center stage again. Bloviations, how clouds shape up and stretch, make faces, puff up, darken and pee softly or raucously. Friggin' clouds, meaning everything to hungry ancients of 5 minutes ago, mixed chalk with oil, twirling brushes, making clouds talk, sock puppets for dreams and hopes of healthy clouds, as if sick ones could even be. Here's a set of 4, okay, now 3, make that 5 clouds. We can agree are non-numerical. Neither the Dow Jones nor S&P 500 tracks them, trades them. Nobody squawks about breakdown of cloud families, nor about clouds going back to school. We can all agree no jobs for clouds, unconscious drifters. Wordsworth wrote, I wandered lonely as a cloud. Well, that's closing in on the matter, the will to flee, but not quite like I floundered, antsy as a socialist geek, putting clouds on center stage for future ancients to riff off of, same mists descending to nowhere, meaning everything from drinking to cooking to bathing to bottling. Okay, guess clouds are tracked and traded, somewhat like human labor accrues steadily, hinting that some kind of cross-entity solidarity arises between clouds and us, demanding tribute and ritual like the scary gods of yore.
Man, that was awesome. Like you rehearsed it. Ladies and gentlemen, we're celebrating here on Nuestra Palabra, Latino Writers Having Their Say, a multi-platform broadcast. That was Rodrigo Toscano reading from his new collection, The Charm and the Dread. Felicitaciones, mano. Great stuff. Really fun to read and so deep and intellectual at the same time. Y puro corazón Latino.
It's great to be here.
No, Mina, part of the family now. We expect you back often. All right.
I'll come back.
All right. Y nuestro amigo aquí, hermano from down the block, Roberto. Oye, hermano, felicitaciones on your new collection just out. Why? The Assembly Disassembled. And looking forward to working with you and hanging out with you often, amigo.
Mil gracias, Tony. Un placer.
Gracias. Hey, thanks for tuning in, everybody. This is Tony Diaz. I want to thank Roxana Guzman, who is our producer for our social platform broadcasts. Also, Rodrigo Bravo, who mixes our show and audio for KPFT 90.1 FM. Mark Anthony Piñon is our graphics designer. Radmes Ortiz is in charge of our search engine optimization. Leticia Lopez helps us with music. And of course, you, dear listeners, are always supporting us. Thanks a lot. And we look forward to seeing you at the Arts. Gracias.